Hello and welcome back to the Dan Cave, and welcome to part 3, the final part of the NuNu Toyota Celica GT4 ST165 from the 1991 Tour de Course. That's it there on screen. So this is the final part, part 3 of the build series. So previous parts, part 1 was bodywork, prime, paint, decal, clear coat, that kind of stuff. Part 2 covered the running gear, chassis, interior. So part 3 draws kind of all those bits together, but also does, I'll say, quite a lot of individual steps. Yeah. I suppose in this video, what I've tried to do is kind of capture an element of all those steps, because I mean, there's quite a lot of parts. You've got clear parts for the lights, you've got the pop-up lights on the front grille, the upper grille, glass work, window surrounds, polishing the body, cleaning all that up. So it's quite a lot. There's a lot to get through. So I'm not going to hang around too long, trying to bore you too much. But of course, before we get over to have a look at what's happened, if you've not subscribed, please do so. It really would be appreciated if you could do so. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any comments, stick them in the comments bit. But most importantly, make sure you subscribe so you can watch all sorts of videos from my channel about scale modeling, obviously. So without further ado, let's head on over to the bench and let's see how everything went in part 3 and how we got to the finale. So first task is, let's flatten back this bodywork a little bit. A couple of dust spots to deal with, and just to generally kind of bring back a little bit more smoothness into the 2K finish and get it all nicely polished up. So 2K was done, well, way back in part 1, but in terms of actual real time elapsed, about a week and a half ago. So to start off with, I've actually gone for, I think it might be 4,000 grit, because there's a couple of little dust spots I just want to knock back. But then, use a little bit of water, wet the surface, attack it, not too much pressure with the micro mesh. Dry it off, check your work, and if you're happy with it, progress on to a finer grade. So I started quite low down on the grades because there was a little bit of, I suppose you'd call, roughness in the surface. Not really roughness, but it's not that kind of crystal clear, perfect reflection. Probably somewhat to do with going back to pro range for this kit, mainly because I still have quite a bit of it and I'd run out of Gravity Spain. But however, issues like that, are manageable at this stage, because you can work with the micro mesh. Of course, in situations like this, especially with these coarser grades, you do need to make sure you're careful of those edges, because it's very, very easy to burn through, and it's not a pleasant experience to burn through and kind of damage your clear coat. But as I said, just slowly progressing my way around the body, kind of starting with the bonnet, the sides, boot lid, roof, and then any little spots on the bumpers that I want to deal with. But as you progress, dry it off, check your work. If you're happy with it, progress on to a slightly finer grade. So once all that micro meshing is complete, it's time to break out the Ump Polishing System. So we're starting off with number 1, which is the compound. It's the harshest of the compounds, but it's not really a harsh compound. It's still incredibly fine and does really kind of get you from that final, 8,000 or 12,000 micro mesh up to a relatively kind of clean finish. So once again, process get a little bit on whatever rag you're using, whether it's a microfiber or whether it's an old t-shirt or something. Work it into the bodywork in a progressive way, and then use a clean corner of your chosen rag to remove the remainder of the polishing material or the remainder of the compound. So certainly prior to using the UMP polishing system, I was using Novus. Now the thing I found with Novus is the coarse Novus polish for removing heavy scratches was far too aggressive for most car bodies. Didn't find that very useful, so hardly ever used it. And then the finer compound still was leaving quite an element of micro scratching, and the actual final polish didn't really address any of that. With the UMP polishes, because they are generally a finer grade anyway, and certainly the compound and the polish are much closer together in terms of grit or particle size or abrasive particle size. I do find they're a better kind of progressive way to get through that polishing stage. And when you get to the actual polish compound, it actually produces a much better result than I ever got with the Novus. So a big tick in the box for that. So as you can see, I've left in the window supports deliberately. In this phase of work, you are trying not to put a lot of pressure on, but sometimes you just can't help it. So those B and C pillars are so fine, I just didn't want to risk damaging them. So the supports were left in. We'll deal with them at a later step when we mask up for the window surrounds, but we'll get to that later. However, for the moment, they stay. So once I'm happy with all the compound work, we could move on to step number 2, which is the polish. And it's basically repeat the same process. Use a clean rag. In this case, for me, I tend to use a different color one. Start by working the polish in the same order if you want. Makes it easy to remember. I tend to go bonnet, sides, and then kind of rear lid, roof, and then deal with the bumpers separately. But again, it's pretty much the same process. Not a huge amount on the cloth. Begin working it in, and then when it's nicely dried on the surface, use a clean corner of the rag and remove any excess material. So you can kind of see from certainly from the reflections you can see on camera, that kind of deep shine is beginning to come back. Certainly people have been critical of 2K, that it can make 24 scale cars look somewhat toy-like. If you put it on too thickly, I think it can. Certainly it has has properties that certainly towards any of the panel edges, it can kind of curve a little bit, and that's what kind of takes away from that clean, crisp lines. But this is where the kind of flattening back and polishing process really does benefit. And you can now see that beautiful shine is starting to come back. And for me, that doesn't look toy-like whatsoever. So, on to the next step. Way back in part 1, we painted the wheels. The decals were on around about the same time I did the decals for the body. So now it's time to go and give them a little bit of a clear coat, just to give them a little bit of shine. So in this case, I'm using some Alclad Aqua Gloss. I think I'm going to put down about 2 or 3 coats, giving it about 20 minutes, half an hour between coats to dry. Once it's fully cured, it's a very robust acrylic clear. Not overly shiny, but it just gives a nice kind of luster to the finished wheels. I have 2K'd wheels in the past, and that can look somewhat overdone and too shiny, certainly on the wheels. So something like Aqua Gloss seems to work for me. So they're left to dry for a bit. They're shown there on camera. I've gotten out a very old emery board. Not sure where I picked it up, but probably came from some cheap nail kit. But it's very coarse, and I find it very good for removing the seams from tires and kind of scuffing up that surface. So it's just a case of place the wheel on one of your fingers, keep on moving it around to get rid of any signs of that seam line. Obviously, you don't want to spend too much time on a single spot. You don't want to flat spot the tires, but you also want to make sure you get rid of any of that seam. So there's quite a lot of debris left over. You can see it on the cutting mat. But this will get nicely cleaned up, and we've got 5 tires ready for the appropriate wheels. So as said in one of the earlier parts, there is 5 wheels. So there's 4 wheels for the 4 wheels of the car, and then there's a spare wheel which will sit in the interior behind the driver and co-driver. So this is easily identifiable by the fact that it doesn't have a mounting pin on the back. The rest of them, the tires just pop on and sit in absolutely snugly against the edge of the rim. And that is the 5 wheels done. So we'll come back to them later, and they'll get fitted to the bodywork. So the next key job for the body is to start masking the window surrounds. And basically anything else that needs to be done in that kind of semi-gloss rubber look, but mainly the window surrounds. So for this, I've collected an array of Tamiya masking tape. I'm sure I'll also break in some Azu very thin tape for some of the bits as well. So you need to make sure you just de-tack it. 2K is robust, but you can have issues if you go full tack with Tamiya tape. It can sometimes pull up basically your clear coat paint and primer. So this is a long process, so I've sped it up. So let's roll some music and sit back and watch the masking. So now that it's all masked, can now snip off the supports from around the roof and windows. So a nice little careful cut. Make sure you don't remove too much plastic. And then a little bit of a tidy up with a sharp scalpel blade. And they pop out just like so. So I decided to wait until it was all masked to do this, because again, just that risk you carry when you're doing a masking job of putting a little bit too much pressure on those very thin bailers. Just seemed practical just to leave them in. So a little bit of a clean up with the UMP sander. And then the very final support. So we set that to one side and can now get to work on the clear parts. So there is decals provided in the kit for the black that goes around the inside of the windows. I am tempted to try it at some stage, but I do worry about the decal adhesive leaving marks that'll be visible from the outside. So I'm going to go back and do what I would normally do, which is mask it up and spray it with either UMP black or semi-gloss black. So once again, it's time to use some Azu tape. Currently using the 2.5 mil. The curves are very, very tight. It's certainly around the corners, the gentle curve at the bottom. There is a nicely defined line around the inside of the window. And play some music, do some masking. So with all that done, it's over to the spray booth with some UMP black primer in the apex and begin laying down some nice thin coats on the glass parts. I do find it's especially important to get thin coats down at the start because the glass is quite smooth. So you don't want to spray any heavy coats because it will run very, very quickly. So you want a nice little dust coat to give you something for your next paint layers to adhere a little bit better to. And you can just build it up slowly until you get a nice, fully opaque black color. So with the windows done, we basically follow the same process for all the trim parts around the car windows. So start with a nice light coat of black paint. Camera positioning is not great today. It means my hand gets in the way quite frequently. And as you can see, I've got a nice label on the back of the apex saying primer. So that's my UMP apex that I use just for primer. So as is usual, spraying the UMP primer at about 30 psi. So that is one potential risk area, spraying at such high pressure. There's more of a risk of a little bit of overspray or any tiny gap in the masking tape. You will get some paint will get through. So sometimes I do use either Tamiya semi-gloss black or Revell matte silk black, I think it is in their range, because you can spray them a little bit lower pressure. But I do find the UMP is a little bit harder wearing. So that long process of masking now completely undone in a couple of minutes of peeling off all the masking tape. There is, of course, a necessity to still be careful at this stage. You need to make sure that when you're pulling off the masking tape, maybe not the bits that I'm pulling off here because they're on the inside, but certainly anything on the outside of the car, a little bit of care is needed just to make sure that you don't lift any clear coat, because that would be disastrous at this stage of the build. But as long as you've detacked it, that risk is minimized. And it's only in cases where there's some very poor prep do you run that risk. And that is the last bit of masking tape removed from the car body. So sadly on this occasion, my masking wasn't up to scratch. So there's a few areas where I needed to use a little bit of IPA and cotton bud just to clean up a couple of edges. That IPA can also be used to remove any overspray because there's a couple of little spots. A couple of little areas I've needed to go back and touch up with a little bit of semi-gloss black from Revell. But that can easily be done with a fine brush and a steady hand. And because it's acrylic, of course, it comes off very easy with some IPA. So the front grille openings and the two lower inserts on the grille. I was originally going to mask these and spray them as well, but kind of looking at how long that process would take, decided to actually just brush paint them. So again, it's a fine brush, some semi-gloss Revell black, Revell 350, I think it is. Number 350. I can't quite see it on the shelf, so I think that's the number. Obviously trying to make sure that black gets all the way into the grille, so you've got good full coverage. I'm not worried too much about the line around the edge of it. That'll go back and be corrected in a few minutes using the same process that we did for around windows. Just adding a little bit more at the back of the grille, just to make sure there's no kind of white pieces that stand out when looking at the car from the front. So then once that's given about 30 minutes drying time, a little bit of IPA and the cotton bud. In this case, I'm using a Tamiya cotton bud and just wiping around the edge, and it just cleans up the edges absolutely perfectly, and you get a perfect finish line on it. So you don't need to worry too much about how tidy the edges are, because this acrylic paint will remove absolutely fine from the 2K. And that has come out absolutely fine. So after a little bit of a pause, set all that to one side, it's time to go and start painting up some of the glass pieces. So first up is the rear light clusters. So they're painted mainly in clear red, but there is a little box within them, which I guess is for the reversing light, which you don't need to paint, and that's shown on the paint instructions, but you just need to remember it when you're brushing them like this. You can, of course, airbrush these as well, but because they're painted from the inside, if you give them a good, nice, thick coat of paint, they will self-level a bit, and from the outside, they'll look absolutely fine. So that is, of course, done for both lights on the rear. So you want plenty of paint, give it good coverage and good depth of color. So once that's had about 15, 20 minutes drying time, we can go back and fill in the other half of the light cluster with some Tamiya Clear Orange. So these are the acrylics that I'm using from Tamiya. I do tend to prefer acrylics at the moment. Car bodies, I tend to use lacquers, but most general work, I tend to use acrylics. So same process for the front lights. A little bit of orange for the lower part, which is the indicator. So that, of course, is done for both sides of those lights. So those are set aside to dry for a bit. We have the wheels that were clear coated and assembled earlier, and now we've got some Tyre Decals to go on them. Now these are basically standard decals. They are different from the Tamiya ones, which are the reverse decals. These ones are just straight up ordinary decals. So just soak a bit of water into the decal paper, pop them on the tire. Get them positioned right. Go back and do the other side. There's 2 decals for each tire, so that's a total of 10 decals. So once the decal's been on for a few minutes, I will go back with some UMP Strong just to help bed them into that tire surface a little bit better. And now it's back to the front lights because they need a little bit of black around the outside. There is a little bit of detailed black painting needed on them. So it's like a demarcation across the middle of the light cluster and kind of a visible black surround around the edge as well. So that's brush painted on using, again, the Revell semi-gloss, semi-matte black that they have. So a little bit of careful brush painting, and that edge will come out absolutely fine. So I'm just making sure I go around and touch up the edges as well, because some of them will be a little bit more visible. And that looks fine to me. So there is a little bit of mesh in the kit. There's a mesh part that goes inside the front grille, between the grille and the radiator. So I'm just using the actual size that's called out on the instructions. Trim the piece back a little bit. Use a couple of dabs of CA glue, and I can just pop that into the front. Eventually, I'll pop that into the front. So just like that. That CA glue will hold it absolutely perfectly. So on the bonnet and on the rear, there is some raised detail for the boot and the bonnet pins. So I'm just going to paint them up with a little detail brush and some Revell silver paint. So easy enough to follow around, just a little bit of careful work with a brush paint Not too much on the brush, but enough so that it will flow off. And you can just follow that kind of outline ever so closely. And that is them complete. Now, all the handling, etc. I'm just going to put a light coat of wax from the Ump Polishing System just on the kind of major body color parts. Because this is a wax, do need to be a little bit cautious you don't go near any of the black parts because it can stain them. So for me, I'm just kind of focusing on the middle of the kind of major panels, on the middle of the bonnet, the roof, middle of the doors, etc. Give it a little bit of chance to dry, and then use a microfiber towel again just to buff that off. So that will have added a nice little coat of wax to the car. It just helps enhance the shine that little bit extra. So wiper blades get fitted before the glass is put inside the body, just because there's not great access to the locating holes once that's installed, because the very bottom lip of that windscreen sits just under the back of the bonnet. So a little bit of PVA glue in the holes and just pop the two wiper blades into place. So now it's time to try and get the glass in. So I'm wearing a glove on each hand. That just reduces the amount of fingerprints that I'm likely to leave on the glass. Because invariably you will forget they're there, and then you'll seal it all up and you'll have a nice fingerprint on the inside of the window. So this just minimizes the risk of that. So two locating pins in the center. Going to use some 5 second, 10 second ish UV resin. Just going to get some resin in and then use the UV light that's applied with it just to cure that resin, and that will hopefully retain the clear parts in place. So I've also put some around the front and rear as well, just to hold that entire section in snugly against the boot and the inside of the bonnet. So while these do offer certainly a very rapid curing time, it's not quite as quick as advertised. So it's worth leaving it a little bit longer. So the inside of the light clusters are all supplied on the chrome parts. There's nice positive location for the rear ones. So a little bit of CA glue, and they pop in place quite snugly. And that's the same on both sides. So obviously make sure you don't get any CA glue on your hands or fingers, because you don't want to leave a CA fingerprint all over your nice 2K finish. So the headlight units are a bit of a squeeze to get in. So obviously there's been a couple of layers of primer, paint, 2K, etc. So a little bit of manipulation. These parts do eventually squeeze in place and just slide in like so. And it's repeat the same process on the other side. And that is both headlight units fitted. You can also pop in the upper part of the grille at this stage. So there's a couple of locating pins. There is a clear part at the top of that. That's got a decal on the reverse of it, so that was done earlier. So that'll just pop in with a little bit of CA glue. The chrome inserts for the headlights can be popped in as well. So now, at this stage, before I put any of the final glass pieces on the outside, I'm actually going to mate up the chassis and the bodywork. So the chassis got all the interior already installed. Chassis got all the running gear installed as well. So in the case of this kit, it's just a case of locating the 2 locating pins on the rear bumper. Make sure everything clears properly. Sometimes you need to put a little bit of pressure on the bottom of the bodywork just to get it over the wheel arches. But in this case, if you kind of slide in from the rear end and kind of forwards from there, it should pop over the arches and then pop down over the front. And there's 2 locating pins on the front as well. So we can now just pop the wheels on. Polycaps were installed back in part 2. So they literally just go straight into their locating points on the suspension and brakes. So a little bit of gentle pressure, turn them a little bit, squeeze them in, and that is the all 4 wheels done. So the top of the installed headlights can have the body painted headlight covers. So they were all painted and decaled at the same time as the rest of the kit. I just didn't show them during the video process, but they were all done at the same time. So then, of course, there's a couple of glass inserts to go over the top. I'm just using a Sharpie to run around the outside to give that effect of the light rubber seal that'll go around the outside of it to prevent water ingress. And in this case, I'm using a little bit of PVA glue, run around the chrome part, pick the part up with a little bit of blue tack, pop it in place, and do the same on the other side. So the wing mirror is also fitted with a little bit of PVA glue. So there's only one wing mirror on this car. That's on the left-hand side, on the driver's side. A bit of PVA glue, and it pops in absolutely perfectly. We can use a little bit of PVA glue on the rear clusters as well. They fit in nice and snugly, actually, which is quite a pleasant surprise. This is one area that a couple of NuNu kits have not been great. The fit's not been brilliant, but these ones are absolutely spot on. So there's the 2 front clusters to go on as well. And they just pop in just like so with a little bit of PVA glue also. Once they're in place, I can get some of the UMP final polishing stage, the shine spray a little bit on a microfiber towel and just add a little bit of enhanced shine to that paintwork. This is also can be used on the glass, so it's a good opportunity to get rid of any unsightly fingerprints. So there is a couple more decals to go on, 3 in total. There is the rear number plate, which pops on as shown. There is the Rally ID plate, which goes on the rear window. And then there's a sun visor strip, which goes across the top of the windscreen. So again, careful, a little bit of adjustment, and in this case it actually fits perfectly. Sometimes these can be a little bit overlength and need to wrap inside the A pillars a little bit, but this one was absolutely spot on. So as is usual, cotton bud just to clean up any excess water. So at this stage, I was almost thinking I was finished. I was looking at the car thinking, am I happy with it? But I decided, no, actually, I'm going to go back and fit the final few parts, which is the mudguards, which had been sprayed red earlier. So with a little bit of PVA glue, they sit just inside the arches on the front and rear. So this is the rear that's shown. A little bit of careful manipulation just to get them in place. And then the same for the front. I think in this case, even though they are plastic mud flaps, sometimes they can look a little bit crappy. In this case, I think they actually look all right. and they've come out pretty good. So I'm pretty pleased with that. I think at this stage I declare this kit finished. And of course, the final step is the obligatory photographs of some strategically posed positions for the car. So yeah, overall, pretty happy with this. Quite enjoyed the build actually, and I may go back and build the Marlboro version at some point in the future. But yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed doing this kit. So we'll head back to me for the final thoughts on the overall build. That's if any of you are still with me. So that was it. We're done. We're finished. Another kit done, and yeah, the first rally car of this year, and I've really enjoyed it. It is a relatively simple kit. It's a curbside kit. It's from NuNu. Very similar to Aoshima's kits. A lot of them are curbside. It's a relatively basic chassis, interior, that kind of stuff. But does it look like a Celica? Does it look like the thing I remember inside my head? Yeah, I think it does. Yeah, it does. It certainly evokes memories of, you know, that kind of early 90s rallying era for me. So yeah, so really pleased with the kind of build, really pleased with the outcome. It'll be one of the ones that'll sit fairly forward. I mean, I suppose, you know, I always try and look back on the positives and negatives. So, you know, the positive side is generally the fit was very good, the cleanup was very good. It looks like a Celica. Quacks like a Celica. Yeah, so it all went together, you know, pretty well. The downsides, I didn't think the glass fitted brilliantly. Part of that, I may have been able to force it in a little bit better, but I was a little bit worried with the B and C pillars being, you know, extremely thin. The risk of damaging or breaking them, I thought was too high. But generally, you know, the glass went in okay. The glass itself is not the clearest. There's a little bit of distortion. Not as good as some of, you know, NuNu's or B-Max's or Aoshima's other efforts. And probably not up there with some of Tamiya's best efforts either. Other downsides, not a huge amount. You know, I think generally it all went together very well. Decals went down fine, so, you know, gets a big thumbs up for me. So yeah, so I'm pretty pleased with the outcome. So yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed the build series. If you've just gotten to part 3, go back and look at part 1 and part 2. If you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so, because there'll be more builds like this in the future, of course. And if you've liked the video, give it a thumbs up and drop a comment, and feel free to ask questions if you want. But yeah, for all of you who are still here, thank you very much for watching. I'm not going to stay around any longer. If you've watched the video, you've seen how well it's gone, you've seen the pictures. So thank you all for watching. Thank you everyone for the support so far. And we'll see you all very soon in another video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.